Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We've seen as far as Pakistan's stock exchange is concerned being recognized as world's best performing stock market in 2024. What are the ramifications of this when we look at economy? What does it mean as far as our overall economic landscape is concerned? We'll be talking about that in terms of inflation, in terms of the key factors driving market growth. We'll be talking about that. Overall, we'll be talking about the kind of surge that it seems we've seen in foreign investment also, and the boost to Pakistani economy ahead of the IMF meeting. Essentially, which sectors are really contributing to the gains? What can we expect in the next couple of months to a year? The economic data, global factors that are also supporting growth. All of that today on Perspective. I have with me Dr. Vaqar Ahmed, who's a senior economist. Thank you for being with us today. We also have with us today Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, who's a former ambassador. Thank you for being with us today. We have with us Dr. Usman Chohan, who's advisor CAS on economy. Thank you for being with us today. Dr. Vaqar, let me start off with you. Overall, what does this mean when we look at this report also, when we look at, the stock exchange being the best performing in the world, it seems. How do you look at this?
Thank you very much. I think the report and, of course, the indicators that you're referring to are all reflective of the stability, which is, of course, returning to Pakistan's economy. It's gradual, it's incremental, while there's no room for complacency. But there is uptick and improvement in the leading indicators. We have seen that this stock market performance is, of course, backed by some very solid announcements by the Treasury, by Ministry of Finance. IMF has also communicated very favorably around Pakistan's next program. We are, of course, due to see the board approval for the fund program next week, and markets have anticipated this much earlier, which is why, of course, the secondary markets, such as the stock market, are performing well. But we've also noted that macro fundamentals, which would also include the inflation rate gradually coming down. We have seen foreign exchange reserve build-up taking place over the past few weeks. And the pressure on currency has largely subsided on the back of project financing, which has come from MDBs, multilateral development banks. So all in all, this is pointing towards some good stability which is coming in the economy. And in the coming days after the fund program, one sort of has to walk the line when it comes to structural reforms so that these gains are consolidated.
Dr. Vaqar, is this also, do you think it will be reflective of the kind of conditionalities as far as the IMF is concerned, the kind of program that we will have, the kind of restructuring that we are looking at this time?
Yes, I think you are spot on. We have committed to some tough conditionalities, and given that we are willing to do that homework in the tax reform space, in case of energy sector, in case of reform of state-owned enterprises, this strong commitment essentially was required by the board as well as to reach the staff level agreement. But more so, of course, this is something which we have to be doing on our own as well. This is what Friends of Pakistan, who have been lending to us for long, including China, Saudi Arabia, and other Gulf countries, would also like us to sort of continue on this reform path. But having said this, this is easier said than done. It will require a lot of political will and capacity to really manage.
Are we looking at more tough decisions, in your opinion, now, politically speaking? Are we going to be looking at, perhaps things like when we talk about, for example, white elephants, when we talk about, restructuring of perhaps even government-owned enterprises, all of those things, and this is going to be a tough phase in that context?
Yes. So I think 2 or 3 things which you have already said, but even when it comes to setting the house in order, the government is actually starting from its own right sizing. The government is shutting down, merging, consolidating many of the government institutions, ministries, departments under ministries, so that there is belt tightening that should take place on the current budget side. Then, of course, the energy sector remains a big gap which needs to be addressed, and there's going to be some very tough reform measures, including renegotiation with IPPs that has to be undertaken, and this is going to be a painful reform. We also understand that energy prices may not come down anytime soon, which means that industry would really see higher utility prices in the medium term, and they'll have to adjust to it.
Right, fair enough. Let me come back to you. Ji, Dr. Manzoor, do you agree with what Dr. Vaqar is saying in terms of what lies ahead? I want your opinion on that.
Yes, I fully share his views, but the only perhaps exception is that he was not very optimistic about energy prices, and I feel that they have fallen quite a bit. And they continue to do so. You
think there's going to be a continual trend,
yes,
a downward
and
trend?
I feel that's one thing that has really brought our inflation down, because energy imports are about 30% of our imports, and because of various things, international whatever is happening, and the US also releasing its domestic stock, etc. So energy prices, for the time being, it seems that they are not going to go up. At least they can stay here, or maybe a little bit fall further, but and that's quite low already, because it's in 70, 72, it was just 87, 90, recently. So that's quite a big fall.
So do you attribute that to the global trend, or do you think it's something that we've done right on the home front?
Well, I mean, there were other things that we did right, home front, because we kept the interest rate high and other things. And also, we were lucky we had good bumper crops, prices of wheat came down, other things came down. But this imports of these things, I mean, both energy, petroleum, crude, etc., really fell down. And that's, as I said, 30%. And the other thing is edible oil. That also, commodity prices fell substantially. That helped, but also on the domestic front.
Right. Let me go to Usman. Dr. Usman, there is, we've been talking about economy for a while. What is your opinion now with this report also? And also, in the background of what Dr. Vaqar is saying, Dr. Manzoor is saying, energy prices also. Let's sum it up for what lies ahead in the next couple of months.
I think that because we're seeing these positive signs in the economy, you are seeing the reflection of sentiment. That is why the stock market has done so well. Okay. It's a little bit puzzling that it is the best stock market in the world right now. Perhaps it's not the best economy in the world right now, so there's some mismatch there. And we have to piece that together. There are some international forces and some domestic forces which help to explain why our stock market is doing so well. On the international front, there has been a deliberate trade out of emerging markets. So emerging markets include China, Mexico, Brazil, etc. And investors have said no thank you. They've said that because for 10 years these emerging markets have been lackluster. There's a antagonism from US investors towards China. They're deliberately pulling it out. And they find more promise in the US itself, as well as in frontier markets, which have included Pakistan, Kenya, Argentina. This promise is because, first of all, there's a lot of money going into AI. There's this huge AI buzz which is unjustified. But also, things are not as bad as people feared in the frontier markets. Argentina is doing better than they thought. Kenya is doing better. And Pakistan is certainly doing better than people feared. So you see this deliberate international shift, which I think is corroborated by the hard work that is being done here, which is extremely positive.
When we talk about the hard work that is being done here, in the next, like Dr. Vaqar mentioned, I will go to him later, in the next couple of months, the government initiatives, the hard decisions, where do you think they're going to be focused on, and where do you think they should be focused on?
It's an excellent point, because and it's something we've talked about at length before, there is so much that needs to be done that it isn't easy to do it all in one fell swoop. So if I had to advise, I would advise that the government focus on energy, as Dr. Manzoor mentioned. I would also look at commodity prices, because this is very crucial to our inflationary structure. Basically, anything you have to do with inflation, whether it's transport, agriculture, foodstuffs, anything that you can get to keep inflation down will solve a lot of the other problems that we have.
In terms of where the inflation, let me come back to you. I'll go to Dr. Vaqar. Dr. Vaqar, in terms of where the inflation is at present, we have seen it finally go down to a certain extent. Do you expect this trend to continue as far as inflation at home is concerned?
Yes. So I think the consumer price index, it had clocked around 9.6% on year-on-year basis in August, which was lower than July, when it stood at around 11%. So yes, the trend is certainly coming down. And the reading, of course, is that when you are under a fund program, usually the aggregate demand is kept under check, which is why you can expect inflation to remain in single digits in the coming months.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you so much, Dr. Vaqar. I understand you had limited time. Thank you for being with us. Dr. Manzoor, when we talk about issues like, for example, industry, certainly, you know, it's a great, where we are at present is something perhaps a lot of people didn't even expect, you know, in the sense that we are looking at better news, we are looking at perhaps doing better. The optimism certainly is something that we all want to cling to also.
Yeah.
But in terms of industries, developing our own industry, developing our own businesses, where do you think the focus now needs to be? Because we want to be self-reliant, we want to be, you know, self-sustainable also in terms of our own economic gains.
Yes, you know, you made a good point that it's better than expected. There was a lot of news about doom and gloom and everything. And I think, you know, I was looking at some figures, what Asian Development Bank said about inflation in Pakistan. They said in 2024 it's going to stay much higher, but maybe in 2025 it might come down to 15%. And we are already in 2024, we are less than 10%.
Yes.
So it's, the news is much better. But where the government need to focus in terms of industry is the government own industries are doing very poorly. So the best for them is to get rid of them.
Okay.
And the privatization effort is making a lot of progress. I think they are, you know, there's a big push for even achieving privatization of PIA this year, Pakistan Steel Mills this year. So there's a serious effort towards that. I think that's good news. But on the private sector, I think government needs to bring down this interest rate. I mean, it's come down. It was 22%. It's come down to now 17% or something like that. But it still needs to come down substantially, because you see, if the inflation is 9%, then you can't have this difference of 100%, 19%. You know, look at India, for example. There maybe is 4 or 5% inflation, and the interest rate is 7%. And look at any other countries. So the difference is too much. Maybe the State Bank is being very cautious. You know, they don't want the interest inflation to go up very quickly. But I think they need to move it a little bit further so that the economy can move, so that there's more investment, etc. I mean, when an interest rate is lower, the business are much happier, and that's what is bringing our stock market so much up, because interest rate is moving now.
Dr. Usman, do you agree? Do you think that the State Bank is perhaps being cautious, and that in the next few months maybe we'll be looking at a further reduction as in terms of, you know, as far as the interest rate is concerned, which will translate into better businesses?
Absolutely. I think that they are cautious, and I think they're a bit too cautious.
Okay.
Because the reading for global inflation is that it will decline, and we will be second order recipients of that. Domestically also, things are getting so much better. But they were a little hesitant to jump to such cut. This is generally true of central banks. They don't just drop by 10 percentage points or something, but our inflation dropped by 10 percentage points or more. So they want to make sure that the reading on inflation...
Do you think it's unexpected?
Yes, I mean, we had 9.6% in the last month. It's year-on-year reading. And in the previous, we had double digits for so long that we were a little bit jolted by how low it was. Partly because things take some time to pass on. We thought it would take time to pass on into the reading. And yet we have such a serious jolt. We're not quite sure if next month's year-on-year reading would be so good. So we also, the caution is justified.
So there is a little uncertainty, and therefore there is the caution. But we've seen a reduction already in, for example, the fuel price. Do you think we're going to see a further reduction, when we talk about inflation? And, of course, for us to translate to the common man, it has to come down, the prices have to come down. Do you think they've come down sufficiently, or, because it doesn't look like it's translated as much as it should have? Of course it has. One has to acknowledge that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think what you and I would both want to get at is looking at this in the longer term. So because we've had inflation for so long, we want to see if this is really a justified thing. I believe, if you ask my forecast, that inflation should keep coming down. I believe that the government can and should cut fuel prices more while keeping in mind the IMF, because that's always looming in the shadows, right? We have an understanding with them on many things. I also believe that the stock market will go further up, because the multiples at which our stock market has traded are below its own historical levels. That it used to trade at 7 times historically, and it's still below that. Let alone that number itself is a discount on a country so large. So we should see a larger premium, and the main components of the stock market should continue to do well, such as the banks. So generally, all of the metrics that you and I would care about, they should get better for Pakistan.
When we talk about, before I go to Dr. Manzoor, when we talk about the fuel prices, or we talk about inflation generally, how indicative are, for example, gold prices in the domestic market to what is happening, as far as economy is concerned?
Well, it's a very important asset. It's very interesting that you raised that. I think we have to have a better conversation about gold, because for 5,000 years we've treated it as a hedge on inflation, and it has been in the last few years a quick fix for people trying to find some protection, especially because it was hard to find foreign currency. So insofar as you believe that the rupee might further depreciate, gold is there, but as Dr. Vaqar said, it may not depreciate. The pressure on the rupee is not so high, so maybe gold's price will also come down now. And so for the utility portion of gold, we use it in rituals and so on, it'll be easier to get a hold of it now. Yeah.
Dr. Manzoor, when we talk about building our own industry, what sectors do you feel we need to concentrate on? Of course, agriculture is important, and we've talked about this, and making it sustainable, bringing it into perhaps better technology. All of those things are important. But where do you think the concentration needs to be now to build it to a level where we are sustaining ourselves, we're independent, so to speak?
See, I always believe that when you open up your economy, I mean, if the government decides, okay, we must promote textiles or this, it's, they are not in business. They just put all their resources that way. Our protection, auto industry, etc. They should open up so that the people, they can decide, and our investors can decide. Okay, this is a good time for this industry. We need to diversify.
You're saying it has to be organic rather than,
organic, but at the same time providing a level playing field
to all sectors.
Yes. I mean, the countries that have done that have really done very well.
But is it possible to do that?
Don't
we have to prioritize some sectors?
No, because government always gets it wrong.
Okay.
Let the private sector decide. You just, we have this thing, okay, all these consumer goods, we protect them very highly, because we think we should. But if you protect them very highly, they'll be produced in the country and consumed in the country, because nobody's going to export them. So let them face some competition, and that has been the success of any country that I mean, I can give you example of, for example, Chile was a very, protectionist country like Pakistan. And they immediately, that was already in the 70s, they bring down all tariffs to 10%. And Chile has become the most successful country in Latin America. It's become an OECD member. And till 1990s, India used to think, okay, we need to protect this sector and that sector. And then they started, leveling the playing field. And now they've done very well. So that's not only the story of Pakistan, that's the story of every country. We should diversify.
But are we ready for it? Let me ask Dr. Usman this, and then I'll come back to you. Usman, do you think we're ready for opening our doors to that extent? Are we ready to benefit from it?
We are perhaps not ready politically. But we should be ready because Dr. Saab makes a very important point that we have a society of white elephants and false idols. The white elephants are these projects that are now being privatized. We're doing it at gunpoint. We should have just done it a long time ago because it wasn't a good model. The same is true for the false idols. When I'm referring to these industries, I'm not naming names, but these are industries that have said they're nascent industries and they've been nascent for 50 years. When are they going to grow up? And the fact is that it's a protectionist regime that keeps them like that, so they first don't innovate. So you're getting the same product in the market. You're buying the same product for your child today that you yourself had your mom purchase for you a generation ago. How is that possible? They don't innovate. And the second is that they are very satisfied selling the same stuff to the same people rather than producing the surpluses to export. So between the government issue as well as the private sector, you and I are getting a bad deal. And that's why you have to open up.
But, I mean, of course, politically, when you said we're not ready, are we ready economically? Because when we open our doors, we have to have certain, that the kind of level playing field that we are talking about, that we've spoken about. Do we have that?
I understand your point. You're saying that there might be some disruption and shock when we first do it. That shock has to be absorbed at some point. The longer you postpone this, the longer and more shocking the issue will be. It's better to do it now than wait another generation or two. And so at some point you have to absorb it. It won't be as bad as you think because the producers will realize that they have to now compete. They will work on price, product, and innovation that'll make it better for people. Whether it is the soaps you buy, the cars you buy, you name the industry, they have to get on the program.
But one of the criticisms, Dr. Manzoor, that invariably comes is that our domestic goods, are they ready to compete?
You see, you look at any country, unless they're open to competition. I mean, there's, you can say, okay, it's not a good time, that's not a good time. But the countries have taken these decisions when they were really at their worst. They were at the bottom. They were back behind the wall. For example, this, and now we quote a lot about Vietnam. In 1986, their leadership, they said, we don't even have anything to eat. I mean, there's some smuggling from Cambodia, etc., with nothing. And then they said, oh, we have been wrong all these years. Let's open up our economy. We're nothing to protect. And now, they are exporting. Pakistan was 3 times more exporting than at that time when they took that decision. Now our exports about 30 billion, and they are more than 350 billion. You see, that what opening up does, because it brings a lot of investment. And when there will be some industry that will die because, if there's international competition, not everyone survives. But new industries will emerge. And so long we, as my friend
then
was
why
just saying,
did we do it sooner?
Dr. Usman was saying that, if we always treat them as infant industries, and 50, 60, 70 years, infant. If you don't let your infant grow out in street and compete, they will always stay. There will be some deformation.
For example, if we talk about a textile industry, internationally speaking, there are a lot of challenges for our domestic industry, for them to be able to, meet those challenges.
Yes, but what's Pakistan is still one of the one of the top 10. But the rest of the world has changed because we at one time 70 to 80% used to be cotton-based textiles. Now it's more synthetic, more polyester-based because of weather, because of sports goods, because of you don't need to iron them, etc. So, and because we cannot produce those, because our tariffs are high on import of those, so we still, end up cotton, and we don't have enough cotton even. So we have to, let it open to competition, and that's why we are in textile. We sell our goods at the cheapest rate. But if we use some imported things, the price will go up.
Do you think, Dr. Usman, that when we talk about, for example, textile, are we, one of the criticisms is that when we don't look for new markets, it's invariably the same markets. If you look at Europe or, for example, the US, why, in your opinion?
It's the same comfort zone mentality. We have deep supply chain relations with the European Union and with the United States, committed buyers. So there's no need to bother, but there are, as you're alluding to, new emerging markets that are interested in clothing and that sort of thing. They should be looked out to. Competition, again, would be very helpful in that regard, because that would force the producers to do the market research. How can I make more surplus now? You get incentivized to work harder and to do better when your back is to the wall. And I think our textiles, yes, we are still a dominant, we still do great stuff, but we have to now see how to target new markets. I appreciate your question. It's true.
What about value addition, research, that is needed to perhaps change, because we are doing the same thing and we're not changing enough? Does it have to do with research? Where is the problem?
Yes, I mean, there's two types of research we're talking about.
Or you mentioned complacency also.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's two types of research we should be interested in. One is the demand side. We're looking at who is interested in what around the world. How can we get our product to them and make some revenue out of it? And the second is in the R&D on our side, a better fiber, a better color, a better texture, those types of things through experimentation. You have to set aside a big budget for that to then make sure that you come out on top. You're always getting signals about what is the best thing. It is a very open world now, and you'll see that there is an avenue here or an avenue there that you can invest in and that you can then drive sales for. It's a very dynamic approach.
Dr. Manzoor, there's always a collaboration between your industry, in terms of your research and the government also, and what comes out of that. Are we, do you think what kind of collaboration should we have? We don't have, it seems, enough at the moment.
Yes, I agree with you. There's hardly any collaboration because the private sector, they don't really have an interest in the government's research, etc. And also there's no collaboration between our academic institutes and industry and the government. And that needs to improve, because in most other countries,
it's always academia.
Yes,
and
they're all together. But yes, here, unfortunately, this has been a problem for many, many years. Everybody realizes, but somehow every sector, government thinks these private sector people are,
But the government does, I mean, to be fair, liaise with, government, with private owned enterprises, and it does, we've seen them make an effort.
Yes, but it's been
enough.
Very low, but I think the change could be that now when they're starting on this CPEC phase 2, perhaps there'll be new investment coming. And so, for example, if you saw McDonald's came and you see this fast food everywhere.
Yes.
So they see this efficient industry working. I mean that low cost energy, it means low consumption of energy. Our industries are old, and so they use high energy. So they will automatically copy those best practices, and that's why I think they'll improve.
And in terms of, let's talk about the IMF. I want to, Usman, also want to focus on what do you expect? Dr. Vaqar mentioned it briefly, but what do we expect now from the kind of conditionalities that will emerge? What kind of a picture are you looking at with the position today?
This is a fascinating question, because I've been reflecting deeply upon the idea that when we signed this understanding of the new agreement with the IMF, our back was to the wall and things looked very grim on certain fronts. And yet, all of a sudden, you're seeing that things are turning around for the better in many areas of Pakistan. This is a double-edged sword, because when we signed up for the stipulations and the conditionalities that came with that, they were very taxing, very demanding things to do. Now, if things are getting better, will we have the same motivation and drive to do that? There's a lot of political capital involved with it. There's a big price to pay. So you may see actually complacency on our side. I would actually think that we should keep the reform agenda going even if things get better. You then save political capital, and you also then can make meaningful reforms while keeping the same momentum. We shouldn't lose this momentum now. So insofar as the IMF is with us, it's made some tough demands, and its forecasts were that the world will be generally pretty bad, and its forecasts are already proving incorrect on some fronts. But we cannot predict even how far the next 6 months will be awful or better in the world because of geopolitical events, because of all of these crises, because the United States elections are taking place. We just don't know what the world is going to look like 3 months from now. So maybe the IMF is not so wrong about things, and it may clamp down hard, not just on us, but on other countries. However, if things stay as they are, things are going to get better for Pakistan.
What sectors do you think they're going to be clamping down hard on? I mean, where? Power?
Yes, above all, it'll be power. And they'll also talk about other ways for you to cut your deficits. That means your fiscal deficit and your current account deficit, which means they may ask for a certain interest rate. They may ask for cutting off spending, like fiscal policy elements. They may tell you that you have to adjust this or that. They will constantly give advice. They're not forcing you to do it, but that advice comes with the understanding that this is conditional for the program. So they will continue to advise you on plenty of areas that shrink your deficit, and however that happens.
Dr. Manzoor, as an economist, of course, there's considerable time to the next budget. What kind of a picture do you think the next budget should be? When we look at what will emerge, in your opinion, where should the focus be?
I think 3 or 4 things. For the time being, we spend over, I think, I don't remember the exact figure, but something like 500 billion in subsidies. These subsidies should come down very substantially. If someone, you can't do a business or you can't run an industry or something, just don't subsidize it. Let it die. I mean, if you get it half the price from abroad, well, I give an example, but maybe not. And then I think your other big problem is energy. For years we tried to subsidize. I mean, even if international prices went up, we tried to sell it at lower than that. I mean, let us stay at the market rate. Unfortunately, it's difficult politically, but we have done it. So let's not again get into subsidies. So energy, this. And the third thing, I think we are much lower than international in our taxation, because we still not 10% of our GDP. Next door India is about 15%. So IMF is insisting that we get there at least 11% next year, and then 13%, and then 15%. So we should focus on that. And it's no way to what they call it through danda. I mean, you can't really force them. You have to digitize so that you know what's happening in the country, and you have proof to go after people, and you don't try to extract taxes from the people who are already paying. Pakistan has very high grey economy. I mean, maybe our 30-35% is grey economy, same as the white economy. So try to bring them in the circle. This can only be done by lowering taxes, not increasing taxes, so that your economy maybe is 370 whatever billion, it should go to 700 billion. So with the same amount of rate of taxes, you can double your taxation.
We've been talking about doubling taxation, tax to GDP ratio. It's always been, looming. Is it better today, Usman, than it was earlier on?
Yes, I mean, there's a lot of effort being done by the Federation. The FBR is working very hard right now. In fact, I think that it's being asked to do too much. A lot of our economy is not in the federal capital, and for that you need the provinces to really get their act together. I think that this lopsided structure between the federation and the provinces is reflected in our fiscal federalism, in our structure. How do you deal with that? Well, you get the provinces to act harder on exacting taxes where they are owed, as well as adding categories where it's due. Our taxation system needs to be fairer, it needs to be more efficient, it needs to be simpler, it needs to be easier to do stuff. And if you're asking just one institution that is based in Islamabad to deal with 25 crore people, it's a very tough ask. So we need to help the FBR in certain ways by restructuring it so that there's other people doing work with them.
I want to talk about that because we've seen, the Prime Minister's approval of the FBR's transformation plan. We've also seen, the focus on digitization and revenue growth, all of those things. In your opinion, how do you look at this transformation plan? Does it take account of, as you said, taking the provinces together? Is it envisaging that there will be more role by the provinces? Because of course they have to work in tandem with the federation, and like you said, for there to be results, particularly here.
This is an excellent point, because one is the tools that we're using and the other is the objective we're attaining. On the tools, digitization helps. Having more data-driven approaches helps. But still the assumption is that it's the FBR that needs to deal with stuff. And I don't believe that's the case. There are many other ways to do taxation which involve sub-national units. And I think that their digitization will also be a nice thing, and for them to execute their role. For example, property taxes in the provinces. For example, collecting and having clearer rules about goods and services. Working on agricultural income. There's plenty of things that need to be done at the subnational units, and digitizing them for that too. So technology is one thing, but the structure is another, and both have to be worked on.
So this, when we talk about incentivizing, for example, tax officers in, improving the enforcement of tax laws, as far as the federation is concerned, certainly it will happen. But like you said, more role, more extraction of taxes by the provinces. Where do you think, by and large, Punjab seems to be, be ahead when we look at the overall picture as far as the provinces are concerned? Would you agree with that?
In certain categories, perhaps, but not all across the board.
Okay.
That is, it has more to do with the rural-urban divide. So Punjab's rural part is quite large, and if you ask me, I think the elephant in the room is actually the size of our provinces. That you have only 4 provinces and one province has more people in it than Mexico. It's just so large. I actually believe that the provincial structure should be different, that you actually, for a country that has grown so much since 1947, you actually need more provinces. You should have about 13, 14 provinces. And that actually makes
13, 14.
Easily, but they'd still be very, very large. They'd still be larger than most countries on earth. And that's why administration would become much more efficient. Because we had an 18th Amendment, which I know you are far more well-versed on than I am, but the 18th Amendment has not materialized in the way it was intended, because things didn't go to the local government. So we're stuck in the middle with these bulky provinces. Either you have an 18th Amendment and you actually have local government work, or you have more provinces who are acting as de facto local governments, but you can't have it the way it is right now. And I know you know more about this than I do.
Dr. Manzoor, when you talk about, for our public debt, of course, that's a huge deal. Every time we go to IMF, the restructuring of it. Do you see us making inroads there in terms of where we want to be in the future?
Well, for the time being, we are in a tough situation. I mean, don't know the exact figure, but if you look at our earning from taxes, I think most of it goes in that. But it can be, I mean, why don't we bring our expenditure down? I mean, we should realize we are not a world power. We should not be, having 120 countries, embassies, and things like that. I mean, and we are one of the, in terms of our poverty, we are somewhere down there, but in terms of procurement of even, arms and defense, etc., we are in the top 10. So we need to bring our expenditure down. That's one thing. And the other thing was about taxes you earlier asked, and the top, this retailer, wholesaler, and agriculture, that constitute about 40% of our GDP. And they don't even contribute 1 or 2%. So these sectors which are outside, they need to come in. And then I agree with Dr. Usman that, you know, it's too big. I mean, we need to move towards local government, and obviously, if we bring down India, I think Punjab is divided into three. So why can't we do in our case? And it's and we have these, I don't know, 26 divisions in the country. So they could have these 26 provinces, and there is this thing. For the time being, the federation is holding too much, although it is they made them responsible, but still they're keeping everything here as well.
I think Usman mentioned also, as far as the relationship, like you said, there's too much burden on the federation, and it has to be given to the provinces according to the share that was envisaged in the 18th Amendment. And they have to be able to pull their own, which is what was envisaged. But for that, like you said, Usman, we need an effective local government structure. And I think that's where also the reform is needed.
Absolutely.
And when we talk about, correct me if I'm wrong, when we talk about economic reform, perhaps that's going to be a part of it, whatever we may call it. Whether we talk about the FPR or we talk about, trickling down and getting to the people. So where do you think it has to start?
From the bottom up. In 77 years, we've always had a top-down mentality, a one-unit mentality. And that's because we were 30 million people. It's manageable but in West Pakistan. But now at 50 million, we are so massive. We are basically, half the size of Latin America's entire population or half the size of Europe's population. That means that we have to think more on the ground. We have to empower people on the ground. There are trends in our society that make this possible. Digitization, as you mentioned, is a very good measure. It's also digitizing as a society. Similarly, education levels, even if our standard schools don't provide the entire education necessity, people are educating themselves on YouTube every second. So we are working with a very different model, and our presumptions of society are still very much in the mid-20th century. But we are now approaching the mid-21st century, and so we have to anticipate how that will be. And the ingredients are there for Pakistan to achieve first world status by the mid-21st century because of the ingredients that we have sown that are very good. It's possible.
Fair enough. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Manzoor Ahmad. Thank you for joining us today. Dr. Usman Chohan, thank you for making the time. Overall, of course, we had a very fruitful discussion on what the future will look like and how things are much better than was envisaged perhaps a couple of months ago. So there's certainly, a lot of optimism, and there's, of course, cautious optimism, and perhaps more of that expected in the next couple of months. We'll also be taking a moment to give a tribute to Mir Hazar Khan Mari, who was, of course, a pivotal figure in Balochistan's history. We've seen a book come out authored by Amar Masood, Muzahmat Se Mufahmat Tak, which is, of course, a remarkable journey and of unwavering commitment to the Baloch people of Mir Hazar Khan Mari, who was, of course, a very well-known figure in Balochistan history. And it serves as a historical account and a guiding light for future generations. It also illuminates the pivotal role of tribal elders in shaping the Balochistan's narrative. Mir Hazar Khan Mari stood against the false narratives aimed at marginalizing the Baloch people, advocating for unity and reconciliation. His efforts resonate today as the youth of Balochistan reject divisive rhetoric and embrace a future rooted in development and progress. In tribute to his enduring impact, a road in Kolo district will be named Mir Hazar Khan Mari Road, symbolizing our commitment to honoring his legacy and advancing the prosperity of Balochistan. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.